So I'm Lola Oyelayo. I'm Director of Strategy and User Experience at an agency called Head. And what I actually want to share with you is linked to wearables, but it's looking broader at the Internet of Things in general and what we've experienced as an agency, what I've experienced as an individual over the last sort of 4 or 5 years. The first thing is that actually as an agency, we're always talking to clients, and because we're an agency, everyone's like, so, Internet of Things, we totally want to do that. And it's getting a little bit, I don't want to sound jaded, but actually it's very difficult to entertain that every time I hear it, because it's almost always going to result in a lot of discussion, a lot of prep work, a lot of vision, and not a lot of execution, ultimately. But I'll tell you a little bit about Head. So Head is 15 years old, and I'm sure they'd be okay with me saying this, but it was started by a bunch of miscreant type men who kind of just wanted to make stuff and hang around and play Medal of Honor in their underwear and see what happens. And so when they created Head, this kind of agency model, one of the things that they created at the same time was Head Labs. And Head Labs is a play pit. It always has been. It's do whatever we like and see what comes out of it. It saw them, I think, can't remember which World Cup it was, but if you ever watched World Cup in the UK and there was a late night TV show with like puppets of Maradona and Sven-Göran Eriksson, Head did that just for fun. If you ever come round, there are also interesting random videos that we've made internally. But one of the things we've been focusing on in the last 4 years is Internet of Things, because part of the problem I have and we have is, so what? So your fridge can talk to the internet, and you can have an app on your phone, and you can wave at your TV to change the channel. So what, right? And this is a really big thing for an agency, because we're not going to sell something that we don't believe in. I certainly am not going to design something that I think is likely to be a pile of poo. And so part of what we've been doing at Head Labs is actually trying to just play with stuff. If it's interesting, let's play with it. Let's see what it does and see if we can figure out for ourselves what so what actually means or could be in a much more hands-on, practical way. So what that means is we've done things like we've played with every type of processor. So we've got an Arduino kit, we've got Raspberry Pi, we've got particle photons, we've taken apart a whole bunch of computer types and models. We built our own smartwatch app last year so that people could discreetly place bets without nobody noticing. That was something that we thought was quite an interesting use case for it. We actually built an open innovation platform 2 years ago that we've never sold to anyone, but it works and it just kind of sits there, and we use it internally to create random challenges. We bought Oculus Rift, we've looked at 3D printing, and we have this kind of like vague ambition to evaluate about 100 technologies or things that we're interested in every year, but nobody keeps count. So to be honest, if we do it, don't know, probably do, but I can tell you at some point. And then there's kind of what I think is some more interesting things that we've done. So you can't see it properly, but we partnered with the Medical Research Council about 4 years ago, just when I joined, to create a stroke rehabilitation solution using the Connect. So anyone who's had stroke, a lot of people who've had stroke have something called left side aphasia, which means they just can't perceive the left side. And it's basically physiotherapy that gets you moving. So if you go to a physio, they kind of shift stuff to the left incrementally to get you to start paying attention to the left side of your body and your brain. So we were like, well, wouldn't this be interesting if there was stuff you could do at home and actually using something like the Connect and a game platform to do that? So we built one. We built it using the Connect first. We upgraded it to use the Leap Motion a couple of years later. And I believe last year we were toying with kind of putting it into Oculus Rift as well, but that Head thing it's a lot. So that was a really interesting one, and it's still a live project with the Medical Research Council. Myrid, who is unfortunately no longer at Head, is still working on it, so we're still involved, but it's not something that we've got in-house. We built our own internal voting thing we call the Votomatic, which was basically a use case we created just to play with the Arduino board when we first got one. And it was an internal presentation evening where people present and then you vote on who gave the best presentation. So we had a kind of thing that was my height, and we had cardboard cutouts of people's I think you can see people's faces. And then we had a TV screen. And every time someone put a little ball in someone's mouth, that animated, and then it counted up the votes. So it was silly, it didn't have a lot of use, but it got us creating something with the Arduino and wiring it up and learning about how that works. From that, we've built things like we created a smart beer mat when we worked with InBev a couple of years ago. So they do Stella Artois. So we were just like, okay, that would be interesting. Last year, we created the Hack-O-Lantern. So we got a pumpkin. We wired it up to actually not an Arduino board, but a Raspberry Pi, because we wanted to be able to tweet the pumpkin. And every time you tweeted the pumpkin, it was next to our receptionist, it would scream and that would scare her. So it was kind of also nicknamed the Scare Izzy project. But we learned a lot because we thought we could do it with Arduino, but actually Arduino can't handle things like tweets coming through in real time and processing. So we had to change to something like the Raspberry Pi. And most recently, we're trying to be more grown up. So this is the Office Vibe project, which is a physical box that is in the office. And throughout the day, however you're feeling, you go and tap the button. And that just sends a little bit of a recording. And there's like a website you can go to where you can see for this week, today, last month, how are people feeling? Is the vibe good? Is it bad? Is it negative? So again, just trying to play with our own use cases. But this is actually now being... I think they're like HR KPIs going to be built out of Office Vibe and stuff. So it's going to be quite interesting. But the context of all of this stuff is we use it to learn ourselves. And from time to time, we create value. And the final one that is actually really interesting for me. So 7 weeks ago, I fell over while running and tore my anterior cruciate ligament and sprained my meniscus. So if you consider your knee has 2 ligaments that do that and help you pivot, one of them's just gone for me. So I can't wear heels at the moment, which is depressing. And I was given this brace, which allows you to have support in your leg, because one of the problems you have is basically your knee becomes wobbly and it becomes wobbly forever, and there's lots of swelling, so your muscles don't know that they need to be switched on and you can't walk properly. So this brace is designed to give you a bit of stability so that you put weight on your leg, because actually, although you're in lots of pain and there's lots of swelling, the last thing you want to do is not walk on the leg, because otherwise you're not going to recover properly. So the brace is designed to help you do that. And everyone kind of saw me on this thing and kind of on crutches and hobbling around, and it was like, oh, robo-leg. And it's like, it's mechanical. It doesn't do anything intelligent at all. But having worn it for 6 weeks, it was actually like, well, maybe it should do something mechanical, and maybe we could make it do something a bit smarter. So I'm currently trying to figure out when I can have an operation to have a reconstruction of my ACL, which means at some point I'm going to be back in the brace for about 6 to 7 weeks. And so it's currently with our Head Labs guys. They're wearing it around the office. We've been ordering sensors. We've been trying to figure out what data could we collect. Obviously, we've got loads of discussions with my physio, my surgeon, trying to work out what data would be useful. I'm a bit of an OCD person, so I want to know exactly what angle my leg was at and when it should have been and how it should have been and should I be getting that. But there are lots of interesting discussions about the implications on the tech, because, you know, it's already quite bulky. Do you attach stuff to it? Because that makes it heavier. And then if you're trying to get someone recovering who's in pain, do you want the brace to be heavier than their normal weight range? Does that create some weird gait issues? Can we measure gait? Actually, are you lilting? Because limping was one of the big things my physios were looking for. How do we do connectivity and data storage? So this whole real time, is it real time and I've got an app, or is it at the end of every day? Does it send something to my physio and then they shout at me the following week because I didn't do it? Equally, there were things like half the battle is the exercises you have to do every day, which involve taking off the brace. But just because you've taken off the brace, actually the injury is still there. So maybe it's a paired system, so a knee sock and a brace that work together, and then when you take the brace off, it knows the brace is off and it's just still collecting data. So there's lots of interesting things. The power thing, is this something else I need to carry a charger for? Don't know, but we've set ourselves 3 weeks to get to MVP. We've already connected with the people who make this device and people who are interested in making other sorts of hardware for this device. So it's going to be quite interesting to see what we can do. We've set ourselves 3 weeks to see what goes on. But the reason I kind of went through those examples is because a lot of this stuff is kind of led by our own curiosity and our own interest. And because we talk about it and we blog about it and we do presentations about it, people come to us and they're like, hey, we really want to do this stuff. But what I've learned is that pretty much no one is ready to actually execute this kind of stuff in a real way. So even with the Robo Lola, I'm fairly confident that the conversations we're having with the brace manufacturers are only going to get to a point. Because unless they can solve other issues around this, they're not going to be able to take it much further. And it's that I almost want to stress. So obviously, as a user experience person, you want to put people at the center of it. You want to think about the interactions and the touch points and all that kind of stuff. You're not even going to get a chance to do that unless there's a whole bunch of behind-the-scenes stuff that you're contextually aware of. But also, it isn't someone's fault if they just don't know they don't know this stuff. So let's start talking about it, because realistically, it's going to turn up being one of those like down in the basement hype cycle things if we really can't solve a few of these issues. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to talk about a couple of client scenarios. I'm not naming the client, no naming and shaming here, but these are real situations that I've been in over the last few years and what's happened and kind of my views on them. So the 3 top trends why this is not happening. So the logistics are always more expensive than anyone has ever really considered. If you've ever worked with the innovation team of anywhere, they exist with no budget. Okay? So innovation people are really smart, they're future gazing, they're futuristic. They're actually supposed to just be negotiators and go and steal budget from marketing and the tech team and the product team, which means they never have the money. And sometimes they don't even have the influence because everyone's like silly toff who's talking about web evangelism or whatever. I'm not interested, okay? The second thing is you cannot have IoT without microservices architecture. And if that doesn't sound like anything that makes sense when you're a designer in this space, you need to skill up on the tech, because you can't create an experience unless you understand microservices and the technology that drives making any kind of device slightly more intelligent, especially when we're not just going to put a touch screen on everything. It's just not going to happen. So you've got to actually be thinking about that. And a lot of the time, again, we'll talk to the product guys and they haven't even spoken to somebody in IT. So they're not even understanding how this thing is going to be driven by their machine. And the third one is a little bit flippant, but you really can't have a CMS with that. No, you can't have a digital standard that every new solution has to integrate with your CMS. This just doesn't need a CMS. Nobody's going to be creating an article for your kettle. It's just not going to happen. So these are the top 3 reasons, and I'll give you the scenario. So scenario 1, probably won't take you very long to go on our website and find out who this is. But anyway, we work with a very large, I think actually the world's 2nd largest appliances manufacturer. And they're based in a really lovely Nordic country, which is the same place as another very large music playing service that everyone loves to use. And thankfully, because the UX community is quite small, I have some connections there. So we got talking once about the possibility of putting this music service in a fridge, because most of us kind of take our phones into the kitchen or we have speakers in there. It's like, actually, wouldn't this be a really cool thing to do, is if that just came integrated with your built-in kitchen that you just had spotted by on your fridge. So the idea was, we don't really know if it's going to work. We're both in Sweden. This is them. I'm kind of here saying, let's make this happen. I can get on a plane. Let's do a hack day, because actually what we probably need is the people who make the fridges to get in a room with the people who build the tech and talk about what their different circumstances are, pool minds with us in the middle, and suddenly we might be able to come up with something. Oh my God, did that ever happen? So I went to Italy, which is where they had their manufacturing, and found out that even something like a 69p Wi-Fi microprocessor, which we don't consider to be anything, that cost for every single fridge that would need to be manufactured could result in millions and millions and millions of pounds of increased manufacturing costs per year. And you don't necessarily have guaranteed sales for that increase. If you're working with a manufacturer, like a hardware, physical product manufacturer, when they do R&D, they're literally in like, what do you call it, like a den, and it's like, they've literally got like molding machines and vices and things, and they're playing with physical objects. But they're not necessary, and they understand this idea of prototype, mold, and then go to the next one. But they don't ever play with the finished stuff. And we can't play with something that has no intelligence in it. We actually need to play with something that they would have had to get to quite an advanced level in order to realistically start thinking about what is this thing going to do. So there was just a complete cycle mismatch. And also it takes them 18 months to get something to the point where they can test it with the user. And we were like, can we do a project in 2 weeks? Not going to happen. The final point was actually really huge. So you buy your fridge. So your relationship is whoever you bought it from, not necessarily who made the fridge. You get home, you need to connect this thing, you need to log in. It's got to have some kind of lifestyle consideration ecosystem. Whose ecosystem are you logging into? Because it's not Apple's. At the time, there was no All-Seen Alliance or all of these IoT people. The manufacturer certainly didn't have a CRM system that allowed them to put like a really nice GUI on it or create an app that allowed you to both sign up for your warranty and sign up for this music service at the same time. So, and you know, the music player, they were kind of like, well, I mean, we're happy to do this, but we're not carrying all the costs ourselves because we do the music bit. So the whole thing just fell apart. Not for want, just because there were just an insurmountable and endless set of questions that meant we couldn't even go as far as get budget for a hack day. So that's scenario 1. Scenario 2 is this year. So an out-of-home marketing, does everyone understand what out-of-home marketing is? So people who sell big billboards and those lovely digital displays on the underground as you're going down. So anything you would see as a kind of like, ooh, 100,000 people go past this board every day, therefore it costs £1 million to put some advertising on there. So they actually specialize in putting marketing in a transport vehicle. So in this case, I can tell you it's like a car vehicle. And so they have a captive audience because you're in it for a period of time and you're not going anywhere and your destination is probably going to be a minimum of £10. So that's 10 minutes, right? 15 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever, however London costs. So they know that they've got a captive audience. They were approached by somebody who makes beacons and they're like, hey, we've got like 10,000 beacons. We want to stick them in your vehicles because that would be great, wouldn't it? And they're like, oh my God, it could be great. Let's talk to the person who's going to spend X amount in the media buying team putting the out of home. And they're like, what are you going to do with the beacons? And they're like, well, we don't know. What do you want to do with the beacons? And they're like, well, we don't know. What should we do with the beacons? Well, we don't know. It's like, who should we talk to about the beacons? Nobody knows who to talk to about the beacons. So they came to us because they were like, who should we talk to about the beacons? Do you know who to talk to about the beacons? And we said, well, maybe, but actually, as somebody sitting in a car, I don't want to have to download 17 apps to interact with their own unique marketing campaigns. I'm probably just going to go on Facebook whilst I'm in this vehicle for the period of time. So there's a whole propositional challenge that just doesn't exist. And we're still talking to them, but one of the reasons I think this project's quite risky is because the hardware guys literally just want to sell more beacons because they expect someone else to create the use case for it. And they don't build any of the technical, the digital services or the cloud services to support this stuff. They don't. Most of them just don't. The company are like, great, we've got this technology, it's cool, it's new, we've got millions of people getting in these vehicles every day. Somebody somewhere must want this. Somebody must want it. But we don't know how to talk to the people who might be able to figure out what to do with it because they don't talk to the app teams or the digital teams or the tech teams. They talk to media buying and advertising teams. Everybody wants it, so they went to talk to a very large retailer who was like, that's really cool. It's kind of in the back of our minds as like number 10 on the priority list. If you can do something and come back to us, we may buy it. So they don't want to do the hard work themselves. And so the question is, who's going to fill that gap? Now, I can't help but think it's a really interesting gap. The worst thing that could happen is that you're sat in a car and you've got your Bluetooth on and every 2 minutes somebody else pings you and goes, hey, discount, deal, dinner, 2-for-1 voucher. And that it's clear that nobody wants that. But as soon as somebody does find that little sweet spot of what to do with that pretty much dead time when you're in the car, that's going to be a big win for somebody. It's just not us yet. Third scenario that I want to talk about is a small appliances manufacturer. I have caveated it's not crock pot, but I did like the picture because they've got Wi-Fi on a slow cooker. So that's clever. I know how much that must have cost them, so that's quite interesting to see it. But so we're also talking to a small appliances manufacturer, great reputation, masses of brands, multinational, pretty awesome actually in lots of different ways when you think about the products that they have. And they are late. They haven't got any connected stuff. They've not been presenting anything at CES. Nobody's written a story about them and their smart whatever. So they're like, okay, we really want to get into this now, but we've got a reputation. We're best in class. We're best of breed. Our stuff is quality. So if we do this, it's right. It's just got to be done. We've not got the skills in-house. So actually what we're looking for is people who can sell it to us, and it's got a proven track record, and then we can enter the market, and it's like, see, we're still best in breed in IoT. Problem is, there's no best practice. There's none. I cannot give you any security that this is done, this works, there are patterns, use cases. You're going to be trying it out for the first time on your customers, on your products in your own unique way. The buy-in versus build is a really big issue. I was having a discussion on the way here. If you buy in all of your tech, especially when it comes to services and digital services, you never get any organizational learning from what it means to execute that stuff. So somebody like Adobe or Microsoft is going to be making millions off you every single year. And every time someone leaves your company, you've got to pay them to send a consultant that's 3 or 4 times as expensive to come in and man a desk because nobody in your company ever got it. And it's this black box thing that you're paying for. And maybe that's okay. Doesn't feel right when it comes to Internet of Things. If this is something that's going to be ingrained in the lives of the people that you service and you say that's part of your proposition, it's kind of not okay to outsource it. So you have to kind of figure out a way to build your own capability. And I believe it's Dyson, I'm not 100% sure, but for example, Dyson sell something, they have a target to sell something like 10% of their products themselves online, even though they sell through other people, and they don't like that. But they're like, if we never sell, we never know what it is to build a direct relationship with our customers. We never know what it is to understand fulfillment. We never know what good looks like when it comes to onboarding. And so you just don't learn. And it's the same thing. It's the principle of user experience. If you're not doing it and you're not observing, you just don't know what you don't know. And so this isn't something you can buy in that way. Unfortunately, they do want it to be connected to their CMS for some reason so that the marketing team can drive it. And I'm not imagining any kind of UI on the type of product that they sell. And if they did have one, I would probably walk past it in a shop because it seems to defeat the purpose of their products. But it's an interesting question because they think, if it's talking about food and I create a recipe, I want to be able to say, hey, recipe, why don't you go to our website and Twitter and Facebook and product in someone's kitchen? Doesn't work like that. Really doesn't work like that. And I think the final point is actually a sensitive one. I think something I've become less angry about and more sort of empathetic about is actually if you're asking for a big amount of budget, even for an experimentation project, because it's not cheap to do the stuff. You do need to get people to help you with it, and so you're going to have to pay. And someone says to you, can you give me the business case? And you can't make one. And you certainly can't make one without saying, oh, it's really cool, we really need to get into it. We get PR impressions. You've got to be able to justify how many more products are you going to sell? How much is this going to impact our bottom line this year, next year, the year after? What difference is this going to make to our proposition? And if they don't speak geek, to be quite honest, saying it's tech, you've got to be digital first, just doesn't cut it. And that's not because they're stupid, it's because they're numbers people and the numbers don't make sense. And so we're not talking to them. We're not even talking to them at that level, and yet we're kind of lamenting the fact that they're not doing this stuff. And I think that's quite sad. So part of what we're doing, and this is, I said it isn't getting started, but we're hopeful that it will, is because we're doing quite a lot of work to create, can we build a business case? We've done a lot of this stuff. We've learned a lot. What can we share that feels like positive learning? How honest can we be about the risk of failure, because that's a very significant risk? Or how do we create enough boundaries around the project so that they can fail safely? Is it that they've got a brand? A lot of these people have multiple brands. So do they have a brand that's quite a cheap brand? And so it's not a big deal if they fail on that brand and not the bigger one. Strategies to actually make it much more practical and pragmatic to do this project. So I can't remember. So I think as experienced designers, the thing I've learned is that we need to think beyond I'm now creating this design. That's not to say when you're in execution mode, if you're in the project, you're not thinking explicitly about the interactions. And I think, Dimitri talked really well about being very sensitive to what happens as a person when you're interacting with these products. But actually, you're just not going to do this project unless you're thinking about a whole bunch of stuff first and helping stuff come downstream. And the reality is you do need to do that. So I kind of polled our guys and talked about what the competency areas are for doing stuff. So these are things that I think help us drive these projects. Whether it's very difficult to find the wonderful polymaths that we have at Head. We've got 2 full-time people who work on Head Labs who seem to be able to do everything, and I've never met anyone like them. So I don't claim that you can just go and hire someone who has all this stuff, but actually recognizing that whether it's in one individual or 2 or 3 or a team, you need to be able to cover off these things if you're going to be talking and doing IoT is really important. So obviously the tech, the frameworks are there, the iOS and Google, they're always changing their own, the things like the All-Seeing Alliance, people are trying to launch new stuff. It's all going to change tomorrow. So you kind of just got to get with the program and be on top of what that change means. Open standards and experimentation. So we talk a lot about faking before you make, because actually just thinking about what it could be so that you can put it out there and get feedback on it is as important as having real stuff. And so with data, you need to know how to fake. We've never had millions and millions of users of our stuff. So when we need to scale, we have to fake, and we have to fake in a sensible way. So there's all kinds of test-driven development methods, but also just thinking about how you stub data sets in order to be able to learn from them and try other things. And then things like technical architecture. Again, I'm not even going to start talking about that because I know one thing Jesh told me to mention was, if anyone here is quite techie, he's been using something called Angular Full Stack, which helps you fake APIs, or not fake APIs, but essentially quickly generate them so that you can almost simulate that microservices model in order to test something out if it's just you and a computer and a sensor and a microprocessor, for example. Materials and engineering, we literally, we moved offices earlier this year, so the Head Lab space has a vice. We've got like all kinds of component drawers. We have 3D modeling skills in the team, just somebody who randomly can do that stuff. So occasionally we make stuff, we send it off, we get it printed, get it back, play with it, see what happens, break it, we invest. But we have to understand the physicality of this stuff, and people are getting slightly better at soldering wires and stuff like that in order to try and create your own connectivity. You've got to think about that kind of stuff as well. The implications from a cost perspective are really important. So don't just assume because you can order Raspberry Pi for 25 quid, that makes sense for a large manufacturer that's shipping, 1 million products a year. That's like a limiting cost. So that's also really good to be important. Obviously, service design, there's the what it is, what it needs to be, and then the bridge in between. And actually, unless you solve that problem, you're never going to get budget. So actually, service design is quite critical for just making the business case. And I think that's both at an experience level, but also at a business analysis and change level. Future gazing, again, people who can see what's supposed to be happening next are underrated because they sound like fools. And actually, you need a fool on your team if that's the case, because you need to have somebody who suggests something that's just weird and crazy and seems impossible, but actually, given our tech acceleration pace, probably isn't, if you think about it in a practical way. And finally, you need a hacker. And I say hacker because, again, part of our exploration has been pulling things apart and then putting them back together again, breaking and remaking and remembering how you put it together just to see. Faking it needs somebody who's got a bit of a mentality where they're quite adaptive. Now, is that going to ever create a production-ready system? No. But it is going to help you learn very quickly. And then at the point when you need to talk about production-ready, you've got someone who can tell you what they did so you can reverse engineer in the right places and go for it. And I'll finish. I think the 2 most fundamental skill sets that most people need are the materials and engineering. Again, if you're actually working with a hardware or a physical business, the cost issue and the physicality issue and what it means to create packaging is quite important. So I know we're talking to one company about things like their recycling ambitions and actually looking at how can the packaging that comes with their product, which is quite bulky, become a Google Glass template. So you can actually, Google Cardboard, sorry, so you can actually use the packaging, make something, and then maybe create an interesting experience around that. So that's, again, something we've kind of proposed. We didn't make it, but it makes sense to understand it. And then the final one is the hacker. Again, if you don't have somebody who's a hacker on your team, or you're not of a hacker mentality, just align with somebody, because I think this is really important. Even if it is a club within the business where you, a guy from IT and some other guy who's just got some freaky ideas, meet up for lunchtime, you kind of need to start building that skill set, or, you know, connecting with people and having these conversations so you can come up with the projects and ideas and things that make sense. And the final slide I want to leave you with is the main reason we have problems getting budget at the most senior level is because people like us are not CEOs or CMOs or CFOs, and we kind of should be. And my favorite crazy person, Elon Musk, has said in the past that the path to the CEO's office should not be through the accountant's office. It should be through marketing, and it shouldn't be through marketing, sorry. It should actually be through engineering and design. So if we can solve these problems and we can start thinking practically about what it means to actually scale these problems and execute these problems and build stuff, we get promoted to the CEO's office, and that kid in 20 years who's got a big project that involves painting in the air with no surface might get budget to explore that. You know, does it sound crazy now? Yes, it's a bit weird, but actually maybe he needs somebody who gets that this is a different way of thinking and to be a bit more experimental in order to actually push the boundaries of innovation. And that's me.